Hey, good evening, everybody, to the 8 Push World, and also welcome to the junior class. I'd like to send this out to the junior class also and start sort of a running installment of some topics in U.S. history, just sort of general topics. I thought it might help to reinforce some of the things that I know you guys are already doing in the classroom. And if there's any questions you guys have from time to time, hopefully the grade, the students from the grade can help out and sort of helping each other work through some of the different concepts you guys are going through in U.S. history right now, or general history, historical topics even. It really doesn't matter. I put a couple of questions up. Regents question. I'm going to continue to do that too. But that's as much as I'll say about that for now. So I thought it might be important for us to go through, although many of you may have been gone past this at this point, an introduction to the Whig Party in history, in American history. So let's just kind of take it through that. This is an image of Andrew Jackson, President Andrew Jackson, but also known to the Whigs as King Andrew I. And we want to talk a little bit about why that label is the label they've given him, but also how it got to that point. So let's look at a couple of things here. Just kind of take it through this PowerPoint. So the Whigs as a party emerge as opposition to the Democrats. Okay. So there's a similarity here between the Whigs and their stance on federalism and a powerful federal or central government, okay, and the opposition, the Democrats, the Jacksonians, and their forebears, people that came before them, the Jeffersonians, okay, what they call the Democratic Republicans at that point. So the Whigs emerge as opposition to Democrats, right? They stand for national programs like those presented in what we've called the American system, okay? And Henry Clay is the originator and the planner of that system. So, for example, one of the elements of that, besides the tariff and things of that nature, or a national bank. Okay, so just want to let you guys know that when you see national Republicans, these are the individuals, the people that eventually will become the Whigs. So the national Republicans kind of break away a little bit from the general Republican Party after the era of good feelings, and the Democrats will become their own party as they break away from the same Republican Party, because after the War of 1812, there really is only one party. It is the Republicans. So you have two sort of groups spiraling off. One that's going towards the Democrats, okay, and one that is headed for the Whigs, but their original title will be the National Republicans. So let's go a little further into that background, okay? So in the same way that the Democratic Republicans, and these are the ones that are led by Jefferson in the 1790s, were born out of opposition. And actually most of these parties in American history are all based on some sort of opposition to something. Okay, Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln and his party, also known as Republicans, I know that's confusing, will be based on the, were born into the idea of having opposition to slavery in the West. Okay, that's their big mission objective, if you will, when they first come into play. Not the only one they have, but they're certainly one of the bigger ones. So going back to the 1790s here, you have the Democratic Republicans born in the 1790s in opposition to Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton's ideas, which again included a bank. So that same idea of a bank continues to come up and be a wedge that sort of drives its way in between these different groups of people who have these different ideas, obviously, and will eventually place themselves within one of these parties depending on what their needs are, okay? So including a bank. The Whigs are born out of the destruction by Andrew Jackson of a similar national bank. So the national bank is in the middle here of both of these really two important parts of political party history, okay? I'm going to say it one more time. The national bank is a really important centerpiece here, in the argument between parties, both in the 1790s between the Federalists, that's Hamilton's party, and the Democratic Republicans, which is Jefferson's party, and here again now in the 1830s, okay, between Jackson and the Democrats and the Whig Party, okay, which will be led by William Henry Harrison and Henry Clay and individuals like that in American history. So here you have a national bank as a centerpiece. So eventually, it should be they, that is the Whigs, will call President Andrew Jackson King Andrew I because he felt that he ignored the other branches of government and liberty in general. So you really want to start thinking about, what are some reasons why, people would give a president who's supposed to be a leader of democracy and everything else a label like that of a king, a monarch, someone who's not respectful of people's wishes, and so on and so forth. Okay, images like this, like from that first slide, come into play. Right? Certainly they dressed him here as a monarch or a king, somebody who's stepping on the Constitution and its freedoms, somebody who is holding in his hand, image of a piece of paper that is a veto. Andrew Jackson vetoed more laws or more bills, I should say, than any president to come before him combined. So certainly he did wield that power, use that power very generously. But is he a king, and what does that mean? That's certainly an insult in American history. As in this American history, King George III it would be synonymous with being an insult, basically, during the American Revolution. Right? You wouldn't want to be associated with that. And yet here is Andrew Jackson. This is a really important image of Andrew Jackson destroying that same national bank. So you have, and this is him actually taking the money out of it. Okay, that's how he killed it. Anything you want to kill a bank, you can take the money out of it. It's pretty much a good way to do that. But if we go back to that bank idea for a minute, the Whigs are born out of the destruction of the bank. So it's actually images like this, no doubt created by the Whig Party as propaganda, right? That is an image of their birth, right? The bank being destroyed is almost, it really goes against their ideals as being a national party and having strength in the national government. The bank's a big part of that, just like Hamilton believed in the 1790s. So, So if we move on a little bit more, zoom out a little bit here. This sets up the second party system. Okay, so we have a two-party system, but we refer to the first party system, first two-party system that is, in the 1790s, right? Democratic Republicans, we said before, led by Jefferson, the Federalists led by Hamilton. Now, any old Jeffersonians sort of dropped the dash Republicans, what I put here, so take this part right there, and just start calling themselves Democrats. Their opposition, as we just said before, born out of the destruction of that bank, is the Whigs. Okay, so Whigs, what kind of people are Whigs? Well, they really can be all kinds of people. This can be a really confusing slide to look at because they can be Northerners, they can be Southerners, they can even be farmers, right? We're really characterizing Jackson, the Democrats, as the farmer, the rural agrarian type of person, but actually they could be Whigs also. Well, we're really talking about Jackson, of the poorer, backcountry whites, of course, who live, further west. Okay, even in the South, but further west is what I mean. Here you have Southerners that live on the Tidewater. Guys, decades ago, like George Washington, would not necessarily have been a Jacksonian Democrat. Right? He lives right on the Potomac River, so he's right there, and of course he is was a wealthy guy. So bankers, manufacturers, of course these groups are really important in terms of the bank and wanting the bank to be there to stabilize the economy. Prosperous farmers, right, those who live by rivers, canals, called the Tidewater, as I mentioned a moment ago. So election of 1836 and the election of 1840 are really instrumental in introducing a party like the Whigs. Remember, this whole presentation right now is just on introducing this party called the Whig Party. All right, so you have the creation of the second party system, as we just said, and the election of 1836. So to this point, Jackson has been president. Democrats have held office for 8 years. You do have some, insecurity about that. If you're the Whigs, how are you going to put somebody that other than a Democrat in the White House, somebody who's not like Jackson, someone who you believe was a tyrant, a king, a king-like figure? So the Whigs received an opportunity when the economy took a poor turn. So they can use this now, and they will, but it really doesn't heat up. I mean, this election of 1836, the panic of 1837 doesn't get really bad until after this election's over. You start to see the beginning stages of it, but it's not something they can really run on in a way that will help them win, unfortunately for them. The Whigs do decide, though, to run 4 different candidates. Okay, they run different guys from different areas, different sections of the country, in the hopes that they'll be able to divide the Democrats, the opposition, force the election into the House of Representatives, as we've seen before, okay, in other elections, and will be able to have the pro-Congress Whig party, okay, just vote for the Whigs, vote the Whigs into power. Unfortunately, it doesn't go that way. They divide their own party so much that it splits the votes in such a way that Martin Van Buren, who was Jackson's vice president and very Jacksonian himself, but politically, not personally, actually ends up winning. So it kind of backfires. The Whigs' strategy, might have been a good strategy, but it didn't work out for them here. So they still, they're still there. They're still a presence, but 1840 is what happens, is what makes them become more of a presence. So the Whigs' luck changes, but at least for only for a short time, unfortunately. So the question is why, right? It's three major things that happen. Van Buren, to this point in 1840, has served as president, and he's been largely unsuccessful in trying to remedy the impacts of the Panic of 1837, which we said was just beginning before the previous election in 1836. Whigs could have ran Henry Clay, his big name, right? The American system. And we know the Whigs believe in the American system, and they want that, and so on and so forth. So Clay would be a good candidate for them to run. But instead, they decided to play the same game the opposition's been playing. So the Democrats chose Andrew Jackson because he was a celebrity. He was a hero of the Battle of New Orleans from the War of 1812, right? It's what they call white horse politics. A lot of presidents have been elected through white horse politics. George Washington himself is a fantastic example of white horse politics. All right, his military background, the fact that he's like sort of this dashing, heroic guy. Jackson was the same way. So people in America during this period of time, rally around that. People in America during this time rally around that. Okay, we have a lot of respect for our military and their exploits today. There's been generals even more recently, not really recently, but Dwight Eisenhower, right, in the 1950s, he becomes president largely on his being commander of the Allied forces during World War II. So it does happen still, but this was a big deal because the Whigs, they didn't really, they didn't see somebody necessarily that was going to personify that the same way the Democrats had Jackson. But here you had a guy in William Henry Harrison who has been successful as an Indian fighter, and during the War of 1812 himself, he's also a hero, at least American whites would say so, during the War of 1812. So he decides to run. Okay, so they decide to run a candidate, what I wrote here, carries an image of heroism and military reputation like the Democrats did with Jackson, because they feel this will meet the image of the common man, and therefore voters will better identify with and vote for. So the log cabin and hard cider campaigning is what is sort of the interesting part of this, all right? Because the Democrats will actually say that Harrison is sort of, they'll make fun of him living in a log cabin. What's ironic is that Harrison actually grew up as a pretty rich guy in Virginia, okay? But he moves to the West. He does most of his Indian fighting in the West, of course. And he sort of gets this image because of that as this log cabin sort of dwelling person who doesn't mind that kind of lifestyle. On the other hand, Martin Van Buren, New Yorker, is portrayed as more of an aristocrat, somebody who's a rich guy who only cares about. So the Whigs have successfully, by running William Henry Harrison, completely turned the tables on the Democrats and put William Henry Harrison in the White House. He actually does win. This whole thing pays off. And Martin Van Buren is sort of run out of town as a, so to speak, of course, as a person who is, hasn't been helpful to the people during an economic period where it was, during a poor economic period, and William Henry Harrison is given us a big chance. So the reason I say that, William Henry Harrison wins through campaign, they would put log cabins in parades, and they put these caricatures of Harrison down there. They would give people hard cider, which is alcoholic cider, right? And they would, they finally win. Is unfortunately the next month. Okay, so I'm saying they have a little luck for a short period of time, and Whigs do get the presidency, but only for 30 days because William Henry Harrison actually dies of pneumonia only 30 days after becoming president. And it's John Tyler that takes over as vice president. And John Tyler is a Democrat. He is against all the Whig programs, and he will veto, including the bank, all of those Whig programs. So the Whigs, for all their gradual, this development we've just been talking about, and that quick success, or that not quick success, that short-term, short-lived success, is unfortunately short-lived for the Whigs. And John Tyler comes in and he turns the tables on it. So Again, I hope you can take something from this.